when I think about cherry tomatoes that have just been wonderful in my garden, I always think of Rosella. I think the flavor is just fantastic. It's a beautiful purple tomato. Flavor is sweet and rich. My plant was super productive and vigorous, so that was a great one for me. Of course, I love Sunrise Bumblebee, and there's a few other bumblebee tomatoes out there which are great.
You're listening to the Food Garden Life Show, the show that helps you grow food, whether it's on a balcony, in a backyard, or bigger. I'm your host, Steven Biggs.
And I'm your host, Donna Balzer. Together we talk with gardening experts, and we talk about what we've done in our years in the horticultural trade, helping you bend the rules and grow food in a way that suits you and your growing zone.
Welcome to the tomato episode. I am super excited about today's episode because joining us is my founding co-host, Emma Biggs, tomato lover, and this year's co-host, Donna Balzer. So, hey, Donna. Hey, Emma. This is great that we're all together.
Yeah,
It's
so happy to
stable.
be here. This is great.
Well, Emma was away and didn't grow tomatoes this past summer. I did, but she still loves tomatoes and still has lots of ideas to share about tomatoes. And Donna's an avid tomato grower too. So why don't we jump right in? I want to start with how early we start our tomato seeds. And maybe I'll lead the charge there and just say I start tomato seeds 7 or 8 weeks before the average last frost date. But there is an exception. And I grow what's called winter keeper tomatoes. These tomatoes that I pick while they're still hard as bullets just before the first fall frost. And they keep ripening until I use them partway through the winter. Right now, in January, I'm still using my keeper tomatoes. So those ones, I don't feel like I need to start off with a big plant. And I usually start those about 4 weeks before the average last frost date. So that's what I do. How about you, Emma?
So I've heard anything from 6 to 8 weeks usually for tomatoes. Of course, a little bit later for some of those keeper tomatoes. Personally, I found that 8 weeks worked really well for me, and I kind of got into a good routine because I was trying to sell my tomato seedlings, and so they had to look perfect at the right time so that people wanted to buy them. So I found that 8 weeks worked great for me, but I think it also depends a lot on your growing setup because what works for you is going to be different for me. But one thing to keep in mind is that everybody's tempted to start those tomatoes a little bit earlier to kind of push it a bit to try and get those earlier fresh tomatoes out of the garden. But you got to keep in mind that it is harder to handle tomato plants that get bigger when they're not in the ground yet. So if your tomato plant is getting, a foot tall, 2 feet tall, and it's not even out of the garden yet, it's going to be hard to have a pot that's big enough for that tomato, to have a light source that's strong enough for that tomato. I was putting all my tomato seedlings out of my cold frames, and the roof of my cold frame is just not tall enough for those bigger tomato plants. So that is one thing to keep in mind is that while everyone wants to go a bit earlier, make sure that you don't start your tomato plants too early or they can be a little bit too much to handle.
Okay, I did that last year. Guilty, discharged. But I tried
We've all
something
done
new.
it, Donna.
I tried something new because, you've all heard of the tomato project, the dwarf tomato project. Last year, I got some of the micro dwarf tomatoes. So I knew their maximum height was going to be a foot tall. What I didn't account for was how big those pots were going to be. Those 15-centimeter pots get to be 14 inches tall. So I was a little bit messed up on that. But I did start some micro dwarf tomatoes, like Red Robin. I started that in December, which was
Wow.
crazy. But I wanted to be the first one. I'm so tired of being the last one to have tomatoes. So I wanted to be the first one. And I did have tomatoes that we were harvesting by March, which was fun. And then I put them all
Yeah.
outside in the greenhouse after that.
Wow. Well, March, that's fantastic.
Oh, that's
Okay.
amazing.
I want to talk about just how or what you plant into. So for myself, I often use old mandarin orange crates and I'll put in a whole bunch of one variety. The other thing I'll do though is just take a 3-inch pot, those small round 3-inch pots, and put in a bunch of seed for one variety in there. And then as those plants get a bit bigger, once they've got the first set of true leaves and maybe another set coming on, Then I'll separate them out into their own individual pots to give them space to grow. How about you, Donna? What do you do?
Well, I don't know where you're getting these mandarin orange crates, Steve. That just doesn't make any sense. They haven't sold those since the 70s. You're too young for that. So you've heard this from me before. I like to use plastic. I use the sturdy plastic 1020 trays. They're just so convenient for me because they fit exactly on a heat mat. I love that. And I never use round pots because you can't cram as many in. The round pots are kind of bumping against each other. I always use the little square 10 centimeter pots. They're actually only 9.5 centimeters, but you can put 18. So you have 18 varieties in one 1020 tray. That's how I start.
Okay. Donna, when you come to Toronto for a visit, I will find some mandarins in a crate and we can feast on them together because we do get them like that here
Oh,
still.
can you still find it? See, that must be a European thing
It's an East
because in
versus
Western
West.
Canada, we get
Yeah.
them from China, and of course they don't come that way. How about you, Emma? How do you grow yours?
So I like to at first plant them into plug trays. So 10-20 tray and then put my plug tray in there. And I just like the fact that it comes in rows and it's all organized and I can just put one label in at the end of the row and plant like, 10 or 20 tomatoes. And I like the fact that each of my plants is in a separate plug tray or separate little cell because then when I'm transplanting them, it's so much easier just to pull it out and plop it in a new pot without having to separate that. That
Mm.
said, however, tomatoes are so resilient. So if you have less space, I mean, plant them all together like dad does, and they're going to do just fine. I just find it's a lot more convenient when you're transplanting hundreds of tomatoes to have them in separate cells so that you can just plop them out and into the next pot. And then for me, that next pot is like a 2.5, 3 inch square pot, as Donna said, because you want to fit as many pots as you can onto that tray just to save space.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well,
So do you ever
so
have sorry, do you ever have a problem when you're seeding in those little starter rows? Do you ever have a problem where the seeds get watered accidentally into another row or you mix up your varieties because they're so close, Emma?
I haven't, no, I mean, I make sure that I just put the soil level a little bit below the top of, like, the edge of the plug tray so that I don't have to worry about the water washing back and forth, and then when I'm watering, I'm just cautious as well to make sure not just, like, flooding the whole tray so that it's like a mishmash of seeds. I go slowly row by row just to make sure that there's nothing moving around in there.
So
Or
young, but
you
so smart.
you can also bottom water too, and that kinda solves that issue.
so
Yeah, that's
Emma
kind of
uses Emma uses those 2.5 inch square pots because she has grown hundreds of tomatoes for her annual sale. I am cheap and I just recycle whatever free round pots the neighbors drop off to me. And Donna, I think you like to buy stuff, so you'll probably be out there buying pots, right?
well, I wash them and reuse them. So that's why I was saying I like to buy the sturdy 1020 trays. For a while there, they used to sell those, and then they went to those really flimsy ones that fell apart in one season. Don't want to buy garbage. I want to buy something that I can use for years, years and years. And I actually found them at a marijuana shop, which was ridiculous. But they
Mm,
seem to want to have better quality materials there, and that's what I got. And it's
okay.
Hey,
fantastic.
well, Donna, that's a great point because we have a whole selection of 10-20 trays. And there's some really great ones out there that we've used for years and years. And there's some that we used for a season and they're falling apart and it's just a mess. So definitely something that's worth investing in is a nice sturdy tray, especially if you're moving those seedlings around. So I found I when the weather is kind of wonky in the spring and I was moving tomato seedlings from my cold frames to outside to back in the shed, I needed a sturdy tray to move those, heavy trays that are filled with pots of tomato seedlings back and forth. And when, you're holding a tomato tray and it just crumbles, that's not what you want. So it's definitely worth investing into something that's good quality and is going to last.
There you go, Steve. 2 for 1.
Right. All right. You're teaming up on me.
Outvoted.
Okay, well, talking about good quality though, I do think good quality potting soil is a must. So I use a soilless potting mix. And what I don't do is I never buy the finely ground potting mix that's for seeds. It's fine, but it's a step that a home gardener doesn't need. It's really for commercial growers who are trying to get absolutely perfect conditions and super high germination rates. So I just buy a high quality general purpose soilless potting mix. How about you, Donna?
I do too, and I avoid like the plague any that say have nutrients included or fertilizer and, in this bag because you want to know before you start your seeds because they have everything they need to grow inside of them. So you don't want other outside influences like different kinds of fertilizer in that mix. So starting seeds is clean, it's simple, it's new soil, it's very neutral soil. If it is too clumpy, because sometimes that pro mix or those commercial mixes come quite clumpy, I just roll it between my hands, crumbles it up a bit finer, and then I use it. And I'm not using the machinery that the commercial growers are using because they have to be really sensitive. If they got a big clump, that could ruin some of their, it would clog up the machinery. So I just ruffle it up by hand and toss it into the trays, and it always works. You, Emma, what are you using?
I use whatever dad buys because it's kind of free to me. I mean, not free for dad, but the tricks. So, less money on soil, more money I can spend on tomato seeds. So it kind of works out at the end.
Oh,
There we
good.
go. There we go. I thought I'd love to talk varieties too. And I
Mhm.
think I have less to say than both of you when it comes to varieties. I mean, I'm a creature of habit. So I have been growing that winter tomato I mentioned for years, and I will keep growing it for years because, hey, I like it. I've got this one called Lebanese Mountain that I've been growing for more than a couple decades. A former client gave it to me. He brought it from his home in Lebanon, this big thin-skinned beefsteak type tomato. I have another thin-skinned big red one that a former student gave me, Chet, and you both know Chet, a lovely thin-skinned tomato. And I've got one that a relative gave me, Franco, and she named it after a late neighbor of hers, this beautiful big red paste tomato. And then I guess new for me last year was a smaller red determinate type tomato called Fakel, and Fakel, if anybody's looking, just absolutely prolific, and it keeps nicely when you have it on the counter. And I just was able to freeze so many tomatoes with it. So it's definitely one I'll repeat. And Emma grows so many cool tomatoes that I won't even go into them other than to say two of my favorites are Sunrise Bumblebee and Cherokee Purple, and I'll let her give more of a list. But what about you, Donna?
It sounds like you're a sentimental tomato grower, Steve. If someone gave you a seed, you just never get rid of it. I had a
Yeah.
friend from Kelowna, beautiful big tomatoes, just fantastic. And he saved the seeds and he lovingly gave me some. And the first one I tasted, yes, it was large. Yes, it was red. But like so many heirloom tomatoes, it was mushy inside and didn't have a lot of flavor. So I think I'm a little less sentimental and I'm a little more firmed up on growing varieties where one of the first things they say in the description is great taste. I did have that example a few years ago when I spent a fortune on a new hybrid, the one called Hamlet. If anyone wants to know, I think it was $16.95 for 9 seeds.
Wow.
And I produced so many tomatoes. I just couldn't believe it. They were red, they were perfect, they were all the same size. I was so overwhelmed. I started putting them outside my fence for people to pick up. And I actually didn't even like these tomatoes. I didn't like them, but they were really high producing. A fellow came by the fence one day and he said, hey, are you the lady giving away those tomatoes? And I said, yes, I am. And I was kind of flattered. And he said they were the worst tasting tomatoes he had ever had. And I was like,
Man.
busted. So sometimes those newer varieties are not good tasting. Sometimes the old varieties aren't good tasting.
Coming up, we have more tomato talk, talking about Emma's favorite varieties and talking more about choosing tomato varieties. That's coming up in just a moment. A shout out today to Jimena. Thanks for tuning in on YouTube. Glad you liked the episode about leggy seedlings. New at foodgardenlife.com, Donna and I have some really fun live events coming up. These are live online events. We have one on growing figs in cold climates, lemons in cold climates, container vegetable gardening, vertical gardening, and easy to grow backyard fruit. That's all at foodgardenlife.com. These are live, they're really fun, and if you've ever dozed off during a Zoom meeting, then these will be for you because they are fun and engaging. So check it out, foodgardenlife.com. You're listening to the Food Garden Life Show.
The show that helps you grow food, whether it's on a balcony, in a backyard, or bigger.
And now back to our tomato episode with our special guest, Emma Biggs, the Gen Z tomato crazy gardener. By the way, you can find Emma online at emmabiggs.ca, EMMABIGGS.ca.
So I'm super curious to know what you like to grow, Emma. What do you like for flavor and maybe some other characteristic that you really love?
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a fantastic point, which is that for me, and I think for a lot of gardeners, it's all about the flavor. I think heirlooms have a reputation of looking weird and tasting great, but there's also so many new ones that taste great. And I don't think it really has a lot to do with, when did the tomato come around? I think it's at the end of the day, what flavor of tomato do you like? Because I think it's also worth noting that we all have different preferences.
Mhm.
Personally, I like a tomato that tastes sweet and rich. And I know the dad's a little bit on a different area of the tomato flavor spectrum than me. And so the tomatoes that we like are going to be different. And so I think that's another thing worth noting is that the tomatoes that I love might not be tomatoes that you love. But I'm going to give you some tomatoes that I love anyway. So one that just popped into my mind when the dad mentioned his winter tomato is a variety called Claire's, and it's another keeper tomato variety. I think it hails from Saskatchewan, and I like it because it's a medium-sized tomato. It's yellow, but it gets some red coloring on it. And I liked it because I found that while it is a keeper tomato and it's meant to last for a long time, I did find that the texture and the flavor I thought was a little bit of an upgrade from dad's winter tomato. And I
Mhm.
know winter is a sentimental variety for dad, and it is a nice tomato, but I thought that Claire's really brought that keeper tomato reputation up to the next level for me. So that's one I wanted to mention. Also, when I think about cherry tomatoes that have just been, wonderful in my garden, I always think of Rosella. I have seen that there's a beefsteak tomato called Rosella, but I'm talking about the cherry one. I think the flavor is just fantastic. It's a beautiful purple tomato. Flavor is sweet and rich. My plant was super productive and vigorous, so that was a great one for me. Of course, I love Sunrise Bumblebee, and there's a few other Bumblebee tomatoes out there which are great, but I really love the color scheme of Sunrise Bumblebee and it has a really great, nice, sweet flavor, pretty disease resistant. It doesn't crack, always does well in my garden. And then in terms of some other bigger tomatoes, of course, I'm also a fan of Lebanese Mountain. If you want a nice big slicing tomato, it always does the trick. I love Paul Robeson. I love Green Giants. I also love the fact that Green Giant tomato always surprises people because they see a green tomato and they assume that it's unripe, but actually it's perfectly ripe. And not only is it ripe, but it tastes great. And so that's another fun one that I really like. And then just another weird one to throw in there is a variety called Thorburns terracotta. And I like it because it has the color of like a terracotta pot. And so
Mm.
it's just a very unusual color for a tomato. And the flavor is very unique as well. And I have absolutely no idea how you would describe it other than it's different from every other tomato I've tried. So there's a few of my top tomatoes.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Wow. Well, I love that. One thing I did try that I didn't like was the pink tomato, and I heard they were really popular in Eastern Canada, and I know you think you're central, but we out west call you out east. Have you guys got any preference for pink tomatoes? I think I
Well,
tried the one called Damsel. I just didn't like it. I didn't like
just
the color.
a comment on that. When I worked in the greenhouse sector in Quebec, many of the tomatoes that were being grown in greenhouses were the pink tomatoes because that's what the marketplace demanded.
And
So,
that's why I tried them. I thought, wow, if everybody down east likes them, I better try them. But did you like them, Steve? Were they good for you?
oh, no, not my favorite. I would take a red tomato any day, as Emma knows, because she's keen on all these beautiful colors, but just give me a big red tomato and I'm happy.
See, I'm with the small tomatoes, not just because I'm in a colder climate, but because of the new breeding down at Berkeley where they've wild collected so many and they've been used in all the new, so they're the better flavored ones to me. But I also love a salad that has the black cherry and, like you said, the sunrise bumblebee, the yellows, the reds, the all of the various colors all in one salad. And if you have one big tomato, well, it's all going to look the same, isn't it? So I'm kind of
Yeah.
a I'm kind of realizing as I get older that I love those cherry tomatoes. And there's one that I used to grow, Sweet 100. Now they have Sweet Million. It's really not 100 tomatoes. It's not a million. It's somewhere in between. But there's so many long chains of red. So when I need just that one red cherry, I've gone back to it. It was one I hadn't grown for probably 10 years. And I realized, it's a good basic red cherry tomato, just the right size. So I've gone back to it. But I have a new one I want to try this year called Harvest Moon. So I'm going to try Harvest Moon. I think that's something that's on my list of things to grow this year.
So
Yep.
talking about cherry tomatoes, this made me think of something that is a really good point for city gardeners. And I get when I teach here in Toronto gardening classes, I get so many people complaining about raccoons and squirrels eating their tomatoes. And the thing is, if you have a beefsteak tomato plant with maybe a half dozen really nice big beefsteak tomatoes, and squirrel comes along and decides to take a bite out of each one, you'll just be getting chest pains. And so what I tell people is if there are a lot of animal pest pressures, grow cherry tomatoes because then there's enough to share. There's some for the wildlife, there's lots for you, and gardening should be fun. You shouldn't be stressed out. So that's a good reason to grow cherry tomatoes.
Mm.
Definitely.
So do you think your sunrise bumblebee and that whole group are your favorite because of the really pretty colors, or do you find they have a good flavor as well, Emma?
I think when I first started getting into tomatoes, the reason why I was so intrigued by them was all the colors. When I first met my friend Linda Crago and I went to her tomato seedling sale, that was when I found out, tomatoes can be brown and they can be purple and they can be green and white. And that is what intrigued me and really got me into growing all the weird tomatoes. But I think, after a few years, I have really started to focus on tomatoes with good flavor. So I love Sunrise Bumblebee and I love Rosella and I love Berkeley Tie-Dye Pink because I find that the flavor is fantastic. And while I still love to grow tomatoes that look really cool and I love the ones with the weird color schemes, at the end of the day, doesn't matter what color the tomato is, if it tastes great, it's going to be one of my top tomatoes. And also, I wanted to go back quickly to talking about pink tomatoes. I don't want to discourage anyone out there from trying pink tomatoes because there's definitely hundreds, if not thousands, of tomato varieties out there that are pink. So, you know what? There's definitely some really good tasting, if not excellent tasting pink tomatoes out there. So, to anyone who's listening, make sure you give some pink tomatoes a try. And if you see one in the catalog and it intrigues you, go for it.
Emma, you bring up a good point because I think tomatoes that are bred for commercial production, so we were talking about the pink tomatoes in the greenhouse sector, they're often bred for traits like how well they stand up during shipping and uniformity, which is important for commercial growers. But if you're looking for taste, they don't always have that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And it's interesting choosing varieties because you have to find the right balance between a tomato that not only is going to taste great, but home gardeners still want a tomato that's going to last. I don't want to pick a tomato or have my tomatoes crack on the vine and then to not be able to last. I want a tomato that is still going to be sturdy enough that I can enjoy it as a home gardener. I still want a tomato plant that's going to be productive and disease resistant. So a lot of those qualities that apply to commercial tomatoes still apply to a home gardener. But I think that often we just put a little bit more emphasis on that flavor component. And especially because, we're not shipping those tomatoes around, we don't have to focus on that as much. But there are just so many things that come into play when we're choosing tomato varieties.
Well,
Mhm.
I have a sort of a closing thought on tomatoes, and then I'll let each of you finish off. But I'm just thinking back to the year, Emma, you did this really amazing tomato tasting for friends. And just to give people a sense, the dining room table was covered with dozens of tomato varieties, each on its own white paper plate that was labeled. And we went around with a knife and cut slices of each one and tasted it. And think of a wine tasting where if you focus on it, you discern different tastes. between different wines. And you can do the same with tomatoes. And I guess I mention that because I'd like to encourage people to have fun, pick a couple new varieties, and it can be a fun thing. Food is a great opportunity to share and spend time with people. So maybe a tomato tasting is something to think about for this coming year. What about you, Donna?
I agree with him on this. Find out what you like personally. I have a friend that hates acid, so she focuses on yellow tomatoes because they seem to be less acidic. So read the little descriptions very carefully. If you know you don't like acid and it says acidic, you don't like it. Personally, I love acidic tomatoes. They taste so sparkly to me, and I just love that flavor. I have grown so many, but the year that I grew maybe 10 kinds that I was displaying at a fair, and the judges were tasting them all. They didn't pick my tomato, and I was so sad. They picked the black cherry tomato, which was not my tomato. So then I started growing black cherry. And again, it seems to be never ending with tomatoes. All I want to say is try something new, keep something old, grow some that are short. Like I really liked the micro dwarf tomatoes because they were good at the front of beds, but grow something tall and indeterminate, something like the sweet million. I think just grow what you like and grow different forms because then they'll use different little niches in your garden.
Nice.
Mhm. That
Okay,
is great
Emma,
advice.
parting tomato wisdom, Emma?
Oh man, so much pressure. I think just I hope that people get out there and they have fun. I always like to do, some of my favorites that just do well year after year. I always grow some of those so that I know I'm going to have some really great tomatoes. And then the rest of my tomatoes are new ones that people recommend or I swap seeds for. Because for me, the part of gardening that really brings me so much joy is the unknown. I love not really knowing what you're going to get because you can read a two-sentence seed description, but it's not really going to tell you what that tomato is going to be like. And, what is the plant exactly going to be like? How is that tomato going to be? And so for me, part of the joy in gardening is that wonder. And so that's why I like to grow a lot of new varieties. But yeah, I hope that people get out there, they try something new, maybe try a few new tomato varieties, and hope everyone has a wonderful growing season.
All right. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Emma. And Emma, I hope we can coax you back for a visit on the show over the next little while.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye.
Bye for now.
We'd love it if you drop by to say hi online at foodgardenlife.com. We have articles about growing fruit, veg, using your homegrown produce, also about growing figs and lemons in cold climates. So say hi. Tell us the topics that would help you grow more of your own. While you're at foodgardenlife.com, also grab our free newsletter. Subscribers get the subscriber-only cold climate fig guide and small space food gardening tip sheet.
And you can head over to my website and grab my really cool printable PDF for a seed packet. You can personalize it for each type of seeds that you save. DonnaBalzer.com. Have a look.
You're listening to the Food Garden Life Show. I'm Stephen Biggs.
And I'm Donna Balzer, here to help you grow.